In the heart of Lagos, where power and money decide who sits and who stands, a woman was about to learn the most expensive lesson of her life. Esin Cole was not used to hearing no. As a billionaire CEO, she turned obstacles into opportunities and people into chess pieces. But on that night, before a mechanic with calloused hands and an 8-year-old girl, a single phrase would change everything. "This table is mine now." What she didn't know is that some battles are not won with money, and some defeats make us truly rich. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you are listening from. I love to know how far our stories travel. The team at the Emerald Bistro moved with the nervous precision of surgeons before a risky operation. The manager, Emeka, adjusted the crystal glasses for the third time, his distorted reflection on the polished surface betraying the sweat that insisted on forming on his forehead, despite the flawless air conditioning. Table 7, strategically positioned next to the window that offered a privileged view of illuminated Ikoyi, was prepared with the obsessive perfection that only one client could demand. Esin Cole. The name alone was enough to accelerate heartbeats and stiffen expressions. At 42, Esin had built coal power from scratch, transforming a solar panel startup into a multi-billion naira empire in less than a decade. Her corporate acquisitions were studied in MBAs, her negotiating coldness feared in boardrooms across the country. Experienced executives trembled before her ability to identify weaknesses in commercial proposals with the precision of an emotional X-ray. Emeka checked his watch. 7:40 p.m. Esin would arrive in exactly 20 minutes, as always. Punctuality was one of her many non-negotiable demands. He took a deep breath, allowing himself a moment of premature relief. Everything was perfect. The fine Bordeaux wine was breathing at the exact temperature, the special menu prepared. Table 7, impeccable, except that it was not empty. Emeka's heart plummeted when his eyes finally registered the scene his brain refused to process. At table 7, Esin Cole's table, sat a man who definitely did not belong to the world of the Emerald Bistro. His calloused hands held the menu with the reverent care of someone handling something fragile and precious. The navy blue button-down shirt, clean and well-ironed, could not completely hide the broad shoulders of someone who worked with his hands. And beside him, a girl of perhaps 8 years, with dark braids and bright eyes full of excitement, pointed to the dishes on the menu with contained enthusiasm. Emeka crossed the lounge like a man walking to the gallows. Babajide Alao felt the approach before he saw the manager. There was something in the body language of the man in the impeccable suit that communicated urgency disguised as courtesy. He knew this posture well. 3 years working as a mechanic in workshops that serviced the Lagos elite had taught him to recognize when someone considered his presence a problem to be solved discreetly. "Sir, excuse the interruption," Emeka began, his voice trained to sound solicitous, even when every word was a silent prayer. "Is there some mistake with your reservation?" Jide looked up, and Emeka was momentarily taken aback by the calmness he found there. There was no defiance in that look, but also no subservience, only the quiet patience of a man accustomed to being underestimated. "I don't think there's a mistake, Emeka," Jide replied, his deep voice carrying the slight accent of someone who grew up on the mainland in Agege. "I booked table 7 2 weeks ago. I have the confirmation in my email." Emeka's world collapsed in slow motion. His hands trembled imperceptibly as he checked the tablet. There it was. Reservation for Babajide Alao. Table 7, 7:30 p.m. And right below, like a professional death sentence, the reservation of Esin Cole for the same table at the same time. Someone had made a mistake. A catastrophic mistake. "Mr. Alao," Emeka swallowed hard. "It seems there has been an unfortunate double booking. We have an excellent table available." "Daddy," Funmilayo's voice interrupted, small but firm. "This is Mommy's table." The silence that followed had weight. Emeka noticed for the first time the third place setting at the table, where a single white rose rested in a small vase. He also noticed the way Jide's fingers gently tightened on the napkin, the only sign of tension in his calm posture. "My wife, Chiamaka," Jide explained with a voice that carried 3 years of practice in maintaining composure in the face of loss, "brought us here once, just once, when we could still afford this kind of luxury. It was 3 weeks before." He paused, his eyes meeting his daughter's before she passed away. "Funmi won first place in her school science fair today. She specifically asked to celebrate here in her mother's place." Emeka felt something tightening in his throat. For a brief second, protocol and professional panic gave way to something human, but only for a second, because through the glass doors of the restaurant, he saw the black Mercedes S-Class pulling into the VIP spot. Ezine Cole had arrived. She emerged from the vehicle with the predatory grace of someone who knows every movement is watched and judged. The Armani blazer draped perfectly over her shoulders. Her Louboutin heels announced her arrival with precise clicks against the marble. But it was her eyes that truly defined Ezine Cole. He saw the armor reassembling, the brief moment of uncertainty being cemented over again by layers of authority. He could have argued, perhaps even won, given that his reservation was legitimate. But he had learned something important in 3 years of raising a daughter alone. Choosing your battles wasn't cowardice, it was wisdom. Understood, he nodded, signaling to Funmi. Let's ask for the bill, princess. That was when Funmi did something none of the adults expected. With the disarming frankness of childhood, she looked directly at Ezine and asked, "Do you work with solar energy?" Ezine blinked, disconcerted by the sudden shift in topic. "How did you?" "Your brooch," Funmi pointed to the discreet gold jewelry on Ezine's blazer, a stylized design of a solar panel. "And my daddy said this table is where important people close important deals. I am doing a science project on renewable energy, about how solar panels can work even on cloudy days using perovskite solar cells." For the second time that night, Ezine Cole found herself without a rehearsed answer. The child was citing technology she herself had helped develop. Complex, cutting-edge technology that shouldn't be in the vocabulary of an 8-year-old girl. "Perovskite," Ezine repeated slowly. "Do you know what that means?" "It's a crystalline structure," Funmi replied with growing enthusiasm. "Like ABX3, where X is a halogen. We can use it to capture light photons, even when the sunlight is weak. I read it in an article by Professor Ngozi Okoye from Unilag." Jide observed the transformation in Ezine's face, the hardness dissolving, replaced by something that looked dangerously close to genuine admiration, and for a fraction of a second, he saw past the ruthless executive. He saw a woman who, in another time, had perhaps been passionate about science before becoming obsessed with power. "Your project," Ezine said, completely ignoring Emeka, who was subtly trying to remind her of the investor's arrival. "What grade is it for?" "Primary 4, Funmi answered, her smile lighting up her face. "The National Science Fair is in 3 months. I want to show that solar energy isn't just for rich, sunny places, that it can work, even in communities where it rains a lot, like in the Niger Delta." Something shifted in the air. Jide felt it, though he couldn't name it. It was as if Funmi, with her passion unfiltered by cynicism, had found a door that all of Ezine's negotiators and competitors had never discovered. The door to the person she had been before Tunde Bello stole more than just her technology. The Chinese investors entered the restaurant. "Miss Cole," Emeka whispered urgently. The executive looked at Funmi, then at Jide, then at the table that had become an unlikely battlefield. For 3 years, since taking total control of Cole Power, every decision had been calculated to maximize advantage and minimize vulnerability. But there, in that fraction of a second, an irrational variable entered the equation: curiosity. "Keep the table," Ezine said abruptly. "Book the meeting in the private VIP room at the back." Emeka practically tripped over his own tongue. "But, Miss Cole, you always prefer." "I know what I always prefer, Emeka," she cut him off. "And now I prefer something different. Lead the investors to the private room. Serve the 2015 Bordeaux. I will be there in 3 minutes." The manager disappeared, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Ezine turned her attention back to Funmi, and for the first time that night, her voice lost its corporate coldness entirely. "Perovskite cells have a problem you probably haven't encountered in your research yet," she said. "Moisture degradation. In tropical environments like the Niger Delta, water decomposes the crystalline structure within weeks. Your project will fail if you don't solve that first." Funmi absorbed the information, her eyes widening with comprehension. "How do I solve it?" "Encapsulation," Ezine replied. Jide realized she had completely forgotten about the 50 billion naira waiting in the back room. "You need to create a protective barrier. There are recent studies using graphene as an impermeable layer. I can send you the latest papers if," she paused, as if waking from a trance. "If your father permits." Jide met Ezine's eyes and saw something he didn't expect. Not condescension, not charity, but genuine recognition of his daughter's talent. It was the kind of look Chiamaka used to have when she saw Funmi solve complex problems with logic that defied her age. "I would permit it," he said softly, "and I would be grateful." Ezine nodded abruptly, already pulling out her business card. She stopped mid-gesture, realizing the absurdity of it. She never gave her personal card to anyone. Direct contact was access, and access was vulnerability. But still, she extended the card. "My personal email is on the back," she said to Funmi, then looked at Jeed with an expression bordering on defiance. "Only for questions about the science project. Nothing more." "Nothing more," Jeed agreed. But there was the ghost of a smile on his lips that irritated Ezin more than it should have. She turned to leave, then hesitated. "And Mr. Aloud, next time you reserve a table, make sure the restaurant doesn't make mistakes." There was something in her tone that could have been humor, or perhaps just Jeed's imagination. Ezin Cole walked through the Emerald Bistro toward the private room, her steps precise, her posture impeccable. But something had changed in her heart rate, a tiny irregularity she could neither control nor name. The meeting with Chen Wei and his delegation began 20 minutes late. In an entire year, Ezin had never been late for any appointment. Her reputation for fanatical punctuality was legendary. The delay, though small, did not go unnoticed. "Miss Cole," Chen Wei said in flawless English, his tone polite but with a hint of disapproval. "We hope nothing serious caused the delay. A logistical complication," Ezin replied, reassuming her professional persona like putting on armor. "Resolved now. Let's get down to business." But as she presented the slides on Coal Power's expansion into West African and Asian markets, part of her mind remained at Table 7, on the child citing crystalline structures with the same ease other kids discussed cartoons, on the man who had refused her authority with respect rather than resentment, on the absurd proposal to share space. The meeting stretched for 2 hours. Chen Wei was meticulous, probing every financial projection, every market estimate. Normally, Ezin appreciated this rigor. It was the kind of due diligence that separated serious investors from dilettante. But that night, she caught herself checking her watch with unusual frequency. When they finally shook hands, and the investors departed with promises of an answer in 2 weeks, Ezin returned to the main dining room. Table 7 was empty. Only the white rose remained, forgotten, or purposely left behind a small ghost of memory. Emeka approached, relieved. "The meeting went well, Miss Cole." "Adequate," Ezin replied distractedly. "The man and the child. When did they leave?" "About an hour ago, Miss Cole. He paid the bill and left a tip that was quite generous for our standards, especially for someone in his economic situation." Emeka hesitated. Ezin nodded, picking up the forgotten rose. The petals were perfect, still fresh. Chiamaka. The name echoed in her memory. A woman she would never know, but who had raised an extraordinary daughter and loved a man who wouldn't bow to power. "Emeka," she said suddenly. "That man, Babajide Alao. Do you have any information on him other than the phone number from the reservation?" The manager blinked in surprise. "I can check our system. Why do you ask?" "Professional curiosity," Ezin lied, and both knew it was a lie. 3 days later, fate conspired in a way that not even the most creative Nollywood scriptwriter could have planned better. Coal Power was inaugurating its new solar panel manufacturing plant in Agbara, Ogun State. 50,000 square meters of cutting-edge technology, 5 automated production lines, capable of producing 200 megawatts of solar power per year. It was Ezin's crown jewel, the project that would consolidate her company as the absolute leader in the Nigerian market. But there was a problem. Miss Cole, Toyin, her executive assistant, entered the office with the tense expression that usually preceded bad news. "The industrial maintenance firm we hired has just pulled out of the contract." Ezin looked up from her reports. "Explain." "They claim they don't have enough expertise for the specialized hydraulic systems we installed. Apparently, the pressure required for the cooling tests exceeds conventional industrial standards. They're afraid of legal liability if something fails." "This is unacceptable," Ezin said, her voice shifting back into the register that made executives tremble. "We have the launch scheduled in 6 weeks. Find another company today." Toyin hesitated. "I've already contacted the 4 largest in the state. They all declined for the same reasons. The system is too specialized. Only someone with experience in both industrial mechanics and high-pressure hydraulic systems could supervise it." Ezin fell silent, her mind already calculating contingencies. Delaying the launch would be disastrous. Chen Wei and the Chinese investors had specifically requested a visit to the operational factory as a condition for closing the deal. "No working factory, no 50 billion naira. Publish an advert," she ordered. "Competitive offer. Completion bonus if everything is operational on time." It was Toyin who, 3 days later, placed a specific CV on her desk. "This candidate didn't apply to the formal advert," she explained. but one of our engineers recommended him. Apparently, he is the best industrial mechanic in Lagos for complex hydraulic systems. He worked on the installation at Lagoon Hospital, on the cooling system of the MRI room. 0 failures in 5 years. Ezine didn't even look at the name. Schedule the interview. He's already here, Toyin said. Meeting room 3. Ezine walked down the corridor of the 32nd floor of the coal power headquarters, her mind already formulating the technical questions that would separate real competence from talk. She opened the door of the meeting room and froze, because there, standing by the window that offered a panoramic view of Lagos, was Babajide Alao. He turned at the sound of the door opening, and for the space of 3 heartbeats, both simply stared at each other. Recognition, surprise, and something more complex that neither was ready to name. "Miss Cole," Jide finally said, and there was something in his voice that could have been amusement. "It seems the universe has a sense of humor." Ezine closed the door behind her, recovering her neutral expression with a conscious effort. "Mr. Alao, am I to understand that you are the specialist my engineer recommended?" "Specialist might be a strong word," Jide replied with genuine modesty, "but I understand high-pressure hydraulic systems. I read about your cooling design for the plant. It's ingenious, but there are 3 potential failure points that need to be addressed before full activation." He wasn't trying to impress, he was simply stating facts. But Ezine had interviewed enough engineers to recognize real knowledge when she heard it. This man knew what he was talking about. "Elaborate," she said, sitting down at the conference table. What followed was 45 minutes of the most impressive technical discussion Ezine had had in months. Jide didn't just understand the systems, he anticipated problems that her own engineers, with master's degrees from foreign universities, had overlooked. He spoke about flow rates, friction coefficients, and pressure tolerances with the naturalness of someone who had spent years not just studying theory, but dirtying his hands with practice. "You don't have a university degree," Ezine observed, looking at the resume for the first time. It was thin. Technical courses, certifications, vast experience, but no formal academic credentials. "I don't," Jide confirmed without shame. "I didn't have the financial means when I was young, and after Chiamaka fell ill, he let the sentence trail off, but Ezine filled in the blanks. Medical bills, a child to raise. Dreams postponed until they became impossible." "But you aren't hiring degrees," Jide continued, his look direct. "You're hiring someone to make sure your factory doesn't blow up during the launch. And I can do that." Ezine should have asked for more references. She should have consulted Toyin. She should have followed the 73 hiring protocols she herself had implemented. But in that moment, looking at the man who had rejected her authority and offered to share a table, she made a decision based on something dangerously close to instinct. "You start on Monday," she said. "The salary is double the market average for your role. A bonus of 30 million naira if everything is operational for the launch." She leaned forward, her eyes locked onto his. "But if there is any failure, any error that compromises my factory or my reputation, you will answer for it personally. Understood?" Jide extended his hand. "Understood." When their palms touched, both felt something that shouldn't exist in a professional handshake. A current, a connection. Ezine withdrew her hand quickly, but the warmth remained on her skin like evidence of something she didn't want to examine too closely. "Toyin will provide all the details," she said, already rising to leave. "And don't be late." "I am never late, Miss Cole," Jide replied. "Punctuality is respect." Alone in her office, minutes later, Ezine stood before the panoramic window, watching the city stretch endlessly below. She had built her empire on 2 fundamental rules: never trust anyone, and always keep her distance. And in less than a week, a mechanic with calloused hands and an extraordinary daughter had begun to make her question both. Her phone buzzed an email from an unknown address. The subject line read, "Question about perovskite." Ezine opened the message and found a detailed question from Funmi about light absorption coefficients, written with the clumsy formality of a child trying to impress an adult. She shouldn't reply. She had 17 meetings scheduled for that week, 3 merger proposals to review, a whole company to run. But still, she began to type, and in the small apartment on the mainland, Jide watched his daughter read Ezine's reply with eyes shining with excitement and wondered what kind of person was hiding behind that armor of ice. He didn't know yet, but he was about to find out. Jide called on Thursday morning. His voice over the phone carried the same determined calm that Ezine was starting to recognize as his emotional signature. "Miss Cole, I accept your offer. When would you like me to start?" Ezine, who was reviewing financial projections in her office on the 23rd floor, felt something akin to relief. She had convinced herself it was simply professional pragmatism. Coal power needed someone competent. The Chinese investors demanded guarantees on long-term maintenance. Hiring Jide solved a business problem, but there was a quiet voice in some forgotten corner of her consciousness, whispering a more complicated truth. She wanted to see him again. She wanted to understand what it was about this man who had managed to do what no CEO, no competitor, no corporate adversary had ever done, make her question her own certainties. Monday, she replied, 7:00 a.m. at the Agbara plant. My assistant Toyin will send you the details. Until then. He hung up without ceremony, without flattery, without the excessive thanks. Ezin was used to receiving from people she had thrown a lifeline to. It was refreshing and disconcerting. Toyin entered the office moments later, tablet in hand, her eyebrows arched in poorly disguised curiosity. So it's true? You hired someone you met in a restaurant? I hired a qualified person who was available, Ezin corrected, not looking up from her reports. Qualified, Toyin repeated, her skepticism evident. Ezin, you normally demand 3 rounds of interviews, background checks, and psychometric testing before hiring an intern. This man you offered a management-level position after sharing a table for 2 hours. I have good instincts about people. You have paranoid instincts about people, Toyin corrected gently. Since Tunde, you don't trust anyone until they prove 10 times that they are trustworthy, and even then, you keep your distance. She paused. What is different about this one? Ezin finally looked at her assistant, the woman who had been by her side for 7 years through brutal acquisitions and sleepless nights. Toyin deserved honesty, or at least as much honesty as Ezin was capable of offering. He said, "No to me," Ezin admitted, and then offered a solution where no one had to lose. Toyin blinked, and that is, intriguing, disruptive, Ezin replied. But yes, in a way, it is. The plant in Agbara was the newest pride of coal power. 50,000 square meters of state-of-the-art technology, capable of producing 10,000 high-efficiency solar panels a month. The investment had been massive 700 million naira, but the projected returns justified every kobo, as long as everything worked perfectly. Jide arrived on Monday at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the agreed time, Ezin noted, because she had also arrived early, telling herself it was to prepare documentation. Not because she was inexplicably anxious about what it would be like to work with this man. He wore dark jeans, work boots, and an olive green button-down shirt that accentuated his broad shoulders. No tie, no pretension, just functional and present. Punctual, she commented. I respect people's time, he replied simply, especially when they are paying me. The first week was a dance of unspoken tensions. Jide moved through the factory with the quiet confidence of someone who understood machines the way some people understand human beings. He identified 3 critical issues in the cooling system that the previous team had missed. He reorganized the preventive maintenance shifts with an efficiency that made operational costs drop by 12% in just 5 days. He was objectively the best hire Ezin had made in years, but there was something else happening. Something on the margins of their professional interactions, looks that lasted half a second longer than necessary, conversations that began on technical specifications and drifted into philosophies about work, about purpose, about what really mattered. You don't have to prove anything, you know, Ezin said on Friday when she caught him still working at 8:00 p.m., long after everyone else had left. Jide looked up from the technical manual he was reviewing. I know. Then why are you still here? Because if something goes wrong tomorrow and I didn't do everything I could today, I won't be able to sleep. He closed the manual. And you? Why are you still here? The question caught her off guard. No one questioned her hours. No one cared because she worked late. It was expected. It was who she was. Habit, she finally admitted. That's a lonely habit. Loneliness is the price of success. Jide observed her with that calm intensity that made her feel simultaneously seen and exposed. It doesn't have to be. Chiamaka used to say that success without anyone to share it with is just a list of achievements that no one will remember at your funeral. The brutal honesty of the statement should have offended her, but something in the way he said it, without judgment, just observation, made Ezin pause. Your wife seems to have been very wise. Pain crossed his face like a cloud over the sun. She was, and I didn't listen to half of what she tried to teach me, until it was too late. They stood there in the empty factory, surrounded by the distant hum of machines in night mode, and for the first time in 12 years, Ezin felt something she had sworn never to feel again, the desire to trust. The accident happened the following Tuesday. Ezine was in Lagos, in a meeting with auditors, when her phone rang from an unknown number. She normally ignored such calls, but something made her answer. "Miss Cole?" The voice was female, official, tense. "My name is Dr. Adebayo from Reddington Hospital. I am calling about Funmilayo Alao. You are listed as one of her emergency contacts." The world tilted. "What? How?" "Her father, Babajide Alao, gave us your number. He is on his way, but he is stuck in traffic coming from Agbara. The girl had an accident at school, a fall during physical education class. Mild head trauma, but we need to keep her under observation." Ezine was already in motion, grabbing her keys, dismissing the meeting with a gesture. "I'm on my way." "Ma'am, are you family?" The question froze her for a microsecond. No, she was not family. She was her father's boss, a stranger who had shared a table, someone who had no right to care as much as she clearly did. "I am what she has until her father arrives," Ezine said, and there was iron in her voice. "I will be there in 15 minutes. She made the trip in 12. Funmi was in an emergency bed, looking far too small against the white sheets of the hospital. A bandage covered her forehead. Her eyes were closed, but her breathing was steady. A nurse checked her vitals with professional efficiency. "She is sleeping," the nurse explained. "We gave her something mild for the pain. The doctor said she was lucky. The fall could have been much worse." Ezine approached the bed, something tightening in her chest. This brilliant child who looked at solar cells as if they were magic, who had asked engineering questions with eyes shining with pure passion, was now fragile and still in a hospital bed. Memories came like a tsunami. Tunde in the hospital, not hurt, but visiting. Ezine had suffered a minor car accident 3 years before the betrayal. Nothing serious, a cracked rib, some bruises. But Tunde had shown up at the hospital, not with worry, but with his laptop. "Since you're here and can't work," he had said, smiling that smile she still loved. "Then, I took the opportunity to bring some contracts that need your review. Efficiency, darling." She had signed the papers. Of course she had. Because she was responsible. Because the business couldn't stop. Because she believed it was functional love instead of disguised manipulation. 3 months later, he had stolen everything. And now, looking at Funmi, Ezine understood something she had refused to face for 12 years. Tunde had never cared about her. Not really. She had been useful, then disposable, a tool, not a person. But here she was in a hospital for a child she barely knew, simply because the thought of Funmi being alone and scared was intolerable. When was the last time someone had cared about her like this? When she had allowed it. "Miss Cole?" Jeed's voice made her turn. He was at the door, his face a mask of barely contained panic. Sweat stained his shirt. His eyes went immediately to Funmi, scanning, assessing, searching for threats. "Is she all right?" Ezine said quickly. "Mild head trauma. She is sleeping. The doctor said she will be discharged tomorrow." Something in Jeed's face collapsed. It didn't break exactly, but it softened, as if the tension keeping him upright was the only thing standing between him and total collapse. He walked to the bed, his calloused hands incredibly gentle, as he touched Funmi's hair. "My little girl," he whispered, "always so brave, always wanting to fly before she has wings." Ezine felt a strange, uncomfortable burning behind her eyes. It took her a moment to recognize it. Tears. When had been the last time? "Thank you," Jeed said, turning to her. "For coming, for being here. You didn't have to. I know. Then why?" The question hung between them, loaded with more weight than his simple words suggested. Ezine could give 10 practical reasons. Corporate responsibility. Funmi was the daughter of an employee. It was the professional thing to do. But looking into Jeed's tired eyes, surrounded by hospital machines quietly beeping, she couldn't lie, because the thought of her being here alone was intolerable. Because, Ezine admitted. "And why?" "Because in 2 weeks, somehow you two have become important to me. I don't know how, I don't know why, but it happened." Jeed studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out, not to shake hands, but just to touch. His hands, calloused from years of work, closed gently around hers. "Thank you," he said again, "for seeing us not our utility, or our need, or what we can do for you. Just us." Ezine squeezed his hand back, and something inside her, something that had been locked and frozen for 12 years, began to melt. They stayed like that, hands intertwined over the hospital bed of a sleeping girl. And for the first time since Tunde Bello had destroyed her ability to trust, Ezine Cole allowed herself to be vulnerable. Funmi woke up an hour later, disoriented but whole. Her eyes searched first for Jeed, then, surprisingly, for Ezine. "You came?" she said, her voice groggy from the medication. "I came," Ezine confirmed. surprising herself with the tenderness in her own voice. That was silly of me. I tried to swing too high. The teacher said I always want to go further than I should. There's nothing wrong with wanting to fly high, Ezin said. Just make sure you have a parachute. Funmi smiled sleepily. Could you help me with my project for real? Like, be my mentor? The word hit Ezin like a physical blow. Mentor, someone who guides, someone who invests not in quarterly results, but in human potential, someone who cares. She looked at Jide, seeking permission, or perhaps salvation from the decision. He nodded slowly, trust in his eyes. Yes, Ezin heard herself say, I would like that very much. In the following days, something changed fundamentally in the dynamic between Ezin and Jide. It wasn't romance, no, not yet. It was something more subtle, an alliance, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Ezin began to visit the factory more frequently, officially to check on the systems Chen Wei had questioned. Unofficially, for those stolen moments where she and Jide talked about more than just work, she told him about Tunde, not everything, but fragments, enough for him to understand why trust was a foreign country to her. He told her about Chiamaka, about watching someone you love fade away, about promises made on deathbeds, about the weight of raising a child alone while guilt whispers that you are never enough. Sometimes, Jide said one night as they checked maintenance specifications together, I wonder what Chiamaka would think of all this, of me working here, of you helping fund me, of, he paused, of whatever is happening between us. And what do you think she would say? Jide smiled, a bit sad but genuine. She would say, I finally stopped being stubborn. That building walls is easier than building bridges, but only bridges lead you somewhere new. Your wife really was extraordinary. She was, and she would have liked you, because despite all your armor, you cared deeply. You've just forgotten how to show it. Ezin didn't reply because he was right, and because admitting that out loud felt too dangerous. But that night in her apartment, Ezin did something she hadn't done in years. She pulled out a box from the back of her closet. Inside were photographs of the person she had been before Tunde, before the walls, before the armor. A woman who laughed, who trusted, who believed the world could be kind if you were brave enough to be kind first. Ezin looked at that stranger in the mirror of the photographs and wondered if it was still possible to find her way back. Her phone buzzed a message from Jide. Funmi wants to know if you can have dinner with us on Saturday. Pizza and project planning. No pressure if you can't. Ezin typed, deleted, and typed again. 12 years of habit screamed at her to refuse, to keep her distance, to protect the territory she had marked around her heart. But then she thought of Funmi in the hospital, of Jide offering to share a table, of how loneliness had stopped feeling like power and started feeling like a prison. I'd love to. What time? The reply came almost instantly. 7. And Ezin, thank you for everything. She stared at the message for a long time. At her own name, no Miss Cole, just Ezin. At the thanks that asked for nothing in return. And for the first time in 12 years, Ezin Cole allowed herself to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, some walls were meant to be broken down, some tables were meant to be shared, and some people, if you were brave enough to let them in, could rebuild the parts of you that you thought were permanently broken. Outside, Lagos pulsed with its millions of stories. But in that apartment, a woman who had spent 12 years frozen was finally beginning to thaw. The journey wasn't over yet. The scars were still there, the fears too, but for the first time, Ezin Cole could see a path beyond them. And it had all started with a table, a double booking, and a man who had offered to share instead of fight. Sometimes, she realized, the biggest revolutions begin with the smallest acts of kindness. The pizza dinner took place on a rainy Saturday in Jide's modest apartment in Yaba. Ezin arrived at 7 on the dot, wearing jeans. Jeans. Toyin would have fainted if she had seen her, but there was something liberating about leaving the Armani in the closet, about crossing the city not in a Mercedes but in a regular Uber, about climbing 3 flights of stairs in a building without a doorman. Funmi opened the door, her bandage now reduced to a discreet plaster on her forehead. You came? You really came? I promised, didn't I? Ezin said, handing over a bag. Inside were engineering materials that cost more than the monthly rent of the apartment. State-of-the-art solar cells, efficiency sensors, a digital multimeter she had imported from Germany. Funmi's eyes went wide, like it was Christmas. This is professional equipment. You are a serious engineer, Ezin replied. You deserve serious tools. Jide watched from the tiny kitchen, a complex expression on his face. Gratitude, certainly, but also something resembling worry, as if he were watching his daughter get attached to something or someone who might eventually leave. The pizza will be here in 20 minutes, he said. Funmi, show Ezine your current project. The living room table had been transformed into an improvised lab. Technical drawings competed for space with prototypes made of recycled materials. Funmi had built a working model of a solar panel using old CDs, aluminum foil, and copper wires salvaged from discarded electronics. It was brilliant, rough around the edges, but the fundamental concept was solid. Do you understand? Ezine said slowly, genuinely impressed, that this right here is basically the principle I used in my first patent, the one that built coal power. Funmi looked at her, hope and fear mixed in her eyes. Is it good? It's exceptional, especially considering the limited resources. Ezine knelt down to the girl's level. Funmi, you have something that can't be taught. You see solutions where others see limitations. That is rare, precious. But will it be enough to win the state fair? Ezine thought carefully before replying. Maybe not. The competition will have kids with resources you don't have. Well-equipped school labs, engineer parents, expensive materials. She saw Funmi's face begin to fall and quickly continued. But here is the secret no one tells you. The best innovations rarely come from those who have the most resources. They come from those who have the most creativity under constraints. Like you, Funmi said. Ezine blinked in surprise. Like me? Daddy told me you started alone, without money, and built everything from scratch. That people tried to stop you, but you didn't let them. Jide appeared with cups of juice, his eyes meeting Ezine's. Funmi asked me to tell her stories of people who won against impossible odds. You were at the top of the list. Something tightened in Ezine's chest. When was the last time someone had seen her as an inspiration rather than a threat, as an example rather than competition? I did many things right, Ezine said carefully, and many things wrong. I built an empire, but I forgot to build connections. I made money, but I lost. She paused, looking around the tiny apartment, the photographs of Chiamaka smiling from the walls, the organized clutter of a home where people actually lived, rather than just existed. I lost things your father never lost, things that can't be bought back. But you're here now, Funmi said with the devastating simplicity of childhood. That means you're learning to build again, like Daddy says. You are building bridges. You are building bridges. The pizza arrived, and they ate around the table covered in engineering projects. They talked about physics, about dreams, about how to turn theory into tangible reality. Ezine found herself laughing, really laughing, when Funmi tried to explain why her science teacher was wrong about thermal conductivity. She is exactly like you were at her age, isn't she? Jide asked softly when Funmi went to get more reference material. Worse, Ezine admitted. I was more arrogant. Funmi has a humility I never had. She has you as a mentor now. That makes a difference. They looked at each other for a long moment, and something passed between them. Not words, but something deeper, the recognition of two people who had been broken in different ways and were learning to rebuild themselves together. Ezine, Jide said, and there was weight in the way he pronounced her name. I need to tell you something. His tone made something freeze inside her. It was the tone of confession, of a difficult truth. 12 years of protective instincts roared at her to run before she got hurt again, but she stayed. Last week, Jide continued, a man approached me at the factory. He said he worked for Zenith Power. He offered me 150 million naira for information about the new thermal storage systems you are developing. Ezine's world stopped. Zenith Power, Tunde's company, the company built on her stolen technology, and Jide had access to everything, blueprints, specifications, secrets that would be worth millions to her competitors. Her voice came out cold, protective, the armor returning as a reflex. And I said no, obviously. Jide watched her calmly. But I thought you should know that someone is trying to sabotage you. And he hesitated. And I know you have reasons not to trust, to always expect betrayal. So I'm telling you before you find out another way and think the worst. Ezine stared at him, searching for signs of a lie, of manipulation, of the micro-expressions she had spent 12 years of justified paranoia learning to read. She found only honesty. You turned down 150 million naira, she said slowly. I did. You still have medical debts. Funmi needs braces. 150 million naira would solve all your financial problems. It would solve my money problems, Jide corrected, but it would create a much bigger problem. I wouldn't be able to look at Funmi without feeling shame. I wouldn't be able to look at you without feeling shame, and I definitely wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror. He leaned forward. Money comes and goes, Ezine, but who you are, that stays, and I refuse to be the kind of man who betrays trust for any price. Something broke inside Ezine. It didn't break in a bad way. It broke like ice cracking in spring, releasing water that had been frozen too long. She had spent 12 years waiting for the next betrayal, building higher walls, keeping everyone at arm's length, and here was a man with every reason to betray her, choosing not just loyalty, but proactive honesty over a temptation she would have never discovered. "Thank you," she whispered, "for telling me, for being who you are. It's the only person I know how to be," Jide said simply. Funmi returned with her notebooks, oblivious to the moment that had just occurred, but Ezine felt something fundamental shift, like tectonic plates adjusting to a new configuration. Real trust, not conditional, but earned, not bought, but given. In the following weeks, Ezine found herself doing things she would have once considered impossible. Leaving the office at 5:00 p.m. to help Funmi with her project. Having dinner at Jide's apartment more often than in expensive restaurants. Laughing, really laughing, the kind of laughter that came from the stomach and had no agenda. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the narrative of her life began to change. Toyin noticed. "You look different," her assistant said one day. "Lighter, less scared." "I was never scared," Ezine protested automatically. "Ezine, you've been terrified for 12 years, of being hurt again, of trusting, of living, instead of just surviving." Toyin smiled gently. "But now you're doing something extraordinary. You're letting people in. You're building something that doesn't show up on financial balance sheets. And that is good. It is essential." The Nigerian National Science Fair took place 3 weeks later at the Landmark Center in Victoria Island. Hundreds of children, hundreds of projects, and Funmi shaking with nervousness as she set up her presentation. "What if it isn't good enough?" she asked for the 10th time. "Then you tried," Jide said, "and an honest attempt is never a failure. But I want you both to be proud of me." Ezine knelt down next to the girl. "Funmi, we are already proud of your work, yes, but mostly of your courage. To watch you try, to risk, to dream big, that is what matters." Funmi's presentation was at 3:00 p.m. She explained her project to a panel of judges that included engineers from the NNPC and professors from Unilag. She spoke about accessibility, about how solar energy needed to be democratized, about how her prototype made from recycled materials could be replicated by any low-income family, empowering entire communities. It wasn't the most technically sophisticated project. Others had better equipment and more polished displays, but Funmi had something else. She had passion. She had purpose. She had a story about using engineering not to impress, but to serve. When the results were announced at 6 p.m., Funmi won second place in the renewable energy category, plus an honorary mention for social impact. It wasn't first place, but when she went up to receive her certificate, when she looked at Jide and Ezine in the crowd, when her eyes shone not with disappointment, but with pure pride in herself, everyone understood. She had won where it really mattered. In the car on the way back, Funmi held her certificates like treasures. "You know what's the coolest thing?" she said. "A girl came to ask me how to make my prototype for her school in a rural community. I'm going to help her." Ezine felt tears burning in her eyes. "You know what that means? You didn't just build something. You're sharing knowledge, multiplying impact. That's what real engineers do, isn't it? They build bridges, they connect people, they make the world smaller and more connected." From the front of the car, Jide met Ezine's eyes in the rearview mirror and smiled. 2 months later, Coal Power closed the deal with Chenway billions of naira in investment, expanding operations across the entire West African sub-region. It was Ezine's biggest corporate achievement in years, but that wasn't what she talked about when she arrived at the small apartment in Yaba that night. "Funmi has been accepted into the Unilag Youth Mentorship Program," she said, showing the letter. "Full scholarship, access to labs, guidance from engineering professors throughout her secondary school years." Funmi screamed with joy. Jide hugged his daughter, tears wetting his face without shame, and Ezine watched, realizing that this moment of shared joy was worth more than any bottom line on a financial balance sheet. "You didn't get this for her, did you?" Jide asked later, when Funmi was showing the letter to Auntie Shade, the neighbor. "I wrote a recommendation," Ezine admitted, "but the rest was her own merit. Her project, her presentation, her passion. I only opened a door. She was the one with the courage to walk through." Jide pulled her into a hug. It wasn't romantic. No, not yet. It was something deeper. Gratitude, respect, the recognition of two people who had started as strangers at a shared table and become something neither of them had words to fully describe. "Thank you," he whispered. for seeing in her what I always saw, for believing when the world says girls from the mainland don't become engineers. Funmi doesn't need me to believe in her, Azine replied. She already believes in herself, she just needed tools and opportunity, and now she has both. That night, in the apartment that had become her second home, Azine realized something fundamental. 12 years ago, Tunda had stolen her technology, her money, her dreams, but he hadn't stolen her ability to rebuild. He had only made her forget that there is more than one way to build. You can build empires, or you can build bridges. You can accumulate wealth, or you can share knowledge. You can protect territory, or you can share tables. And sometimes, just sometimes, by choosing the second option, you end up winning something far more valuable than any financial sum. Belonging, connection, a family of choice. 6 months later, Azine received an unmarked envelope in her office. Inside was a photograph, Table 7 at the Emerald Bistro, now officially called the Table of Hope, after the story of her meeting with Jide leaked to the press. And a note from Emeka, the manager. To the woman who taught us that some tables are not made for one person, they are made for all the right people to find each other. Azine placed the photo in her office, not hidden in a drawer, but right there on the wall where she could see it every day. A reminder that she had walked into a restaurant demanding territory and walked out with something far more precious, a family. And that sometimes, the greatest victories come when you stop fighting to be right and start building what is right. Jide proposed to her on an ordinary Tuesday, without fanfare, just the two of them at the Agbara factory, surrounded by the machines that joined their industrial symphony. It's not romantic, he said, holding a simple ring. It's not an expensive restaurant or a sunset on the beach. It's perfect, Azine said, because it's real, like you, like us. So yes, 1,000 times yes. Because Azine Cole had learned something that 12 years of paranoia and walls hadn't taught her, that true strength doesn't come from controlling spaces. It comes from having the courage to share them. That real wealth isn't in bank accounts. It's in the people who choose you over and over again, with no hidden agenda. And that sometimes, the table you think is yours is actually waiting for the right people to make it complete. Across the table, Jide smiled, and Funmi, who had witnessed everything hiding behind a stack of crates, screamed with joy. A family not of blood, but of choice, built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared vulnerability, and a table that refused to belong to just one person. Because some tables, like some hearts, are big enough for everyone. You just have to have the courage to share. Azine Cole entered that restaurant as a conqueror, ready to claim what she believed was hers by right. She left carrying something much more valuable, the understanding that true strength is not in dominating spaces, but in knowing how to share tables. Jide didn't need a fortune to leave her dumbfounded, only the courage to value what truly matters. Sometimes, the greatest victories in life come when we stop fighting for the throne and start building bridges. If this story touched your heart, leave your like, and tell us in the comments which part of the story touched you the most, which part made you the most emotional. Subscribe to the channel, and I hope we see each other again in the next videos, because here on the Echoes of the Heart channel, the best story is always the next one, a warm embrace.